Right, Alhamdulillah, today is our last session on our Ideological 101 class. And honestly, how to engage in an ideological war, or any war for that matter, is not a matter of just one sitting. You could have hours and hours of policy meetings on this very topic, right? But the point is to introduce us to the battlefield, to introduce us to the main points that we need to consider whenever we want to engage in any sort of warfare activity. We've already been pushed into the battle, so it's not like we're going to have to pause, make a plan, and then go back in. We have to make our plan as we're working, right? So it's the utmost important to know that this war has been going on for such a long time, and we haven't been paying as much attention as we should have. But it's okay. It's about time we pick ourselves back up. And so we're going to talk about today how we're going to discuss or engage in ideological warfare. For the past 4 or 5 classes, we've been talking about some of the main questions that you need to ask, right? Like who our enemy is, who are we fighting against, uh, in which direction is the enemy attacking us, like what are the fields in which they're engaging us in combat, right? And what are the tools that we need to have in order to engage in a certain type of combat. And where do we stand in this? So we initially talked about those few questions, but there are a few questions that still need to be addressed. And that's what we're going to be talking about today, right? So we've known who our enemy is, how they're attacking, what they're using to attack us, and what their objectives are. Today we're going to discuss about how are we going to counteract them, right? And so in order to do that, we need to be able to answer two very fundamental questions. First of all, is what are our strengths and our weaknesses? So everybody has some strengths and they have some weaknesses. We need to determine what our strengths are and what are the things that we are weak in. And the second thing that we need to know is what the enemy is weak in, right? So what are their weaknesses? How do we exploit them? And these are going to be the main points that we'll be talking about today. So first of all, talk about field analysis. So we need to gauge the entirety of what's going on in order to wage an effective war. Then there's some preliminary work that needs to be done, right? We need preparations. So what are those preparations? And then we go into the war itself. So the field analysis is basically taking a quick look, and in order to effectively engage the enemy, we need to understand four factors. We need to understand our weaknesses so we can fix them, we can improve on them. We need to know our strengths, right? Because if we know our strength, we know what we're capable of, we will be confident in the battlefield, right? And that confidence uh, and the fact that we know what we're good at is going to help us get the upper hand. Similarly, we need to know the enemy's weaknesses because that's the only way we know where to hit them, right? And lastly, we know to know the enemy's strength because this is where our defenses are going to be the highest, right? And now the first thing, our weaknesses. So we have a lot of weaknesses, honestly. The first weakness that we have is a weakness in our iman, in our faith, right? I mean, such a sad state that we ourselves don't have the belief that we should have in the promises of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We as believers don't have the belief that we should have in the ahkam of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, in what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has promised us, in what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is scaring us off, right? We don't have the belief in the predictions that Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam made for us so many years ago, right? So because of that weak faith, we're in a state that anybody can just go push us around. And you've seen that happening all around. The question is, how do we address this weakness in faith? Well, one of the ways to do that is to associate ourselves with people of strong faiths, right? We need to associate ourselves with activities and people and groups that are working on improving their faith. Right? You don't need to get someone perfect. You need to have people with the same mindset, with the same goal and target, with the same aspiration. So join yourselves, associate yourself with people and groups working towards improving their faith, right? People with good faith, people taking care of their duties as Muslims, their duties towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, their duty towards the people they are living amongst, right? Those who remember Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in reverence and with uh, great istiqamah, with steadfastness, right? They're taking care of all of their ibadat, their farais, their nawafil, and they are willing, and they are not just willing, they're actually sacrificing their time, their wealth, right, their health in the cause of Islam, in the cause of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The second thing that we have is basically decadence, right? So we have a weakness in our a'mal. In our amal, we have a weakness like as-salah being the most important part of Islam. The hadith of the Prophet ﷺ literally says that after the Shahada, after accepting Islam, after faith, the most important thing that you could have is Salah. And now look at where we are standing as a society, as an ummah. How many people are actually praying, right? Forget about iqamat salah, establishing prayer with all of its rights and all of its factors that should be there. How many of us are just praying? And like the boycott was important, the protests were important, right? Nobody's denying that. But how many of our brothers and sisters might have forfeited their salah in order to join the protest, in order to join some demonstration, right? Does going in a protest mean that our masajid should be abandoned? Right? So we have such a weakness in our, and this is salah, the most important thing. Forget about sadaqat, forget about the spending, right? The charity work. It's not that only there should be a calamity that we give charity. This should have been our inbuilt habit from the start. We should be doing this every day, every week, but we're not doing that, right? And these are just the basic ibadat. When we come to the fact about حقوق ibad, giving the people their due rights, there is so, we are, as an ummah, sorry to say, so behind on that chapter of our deen. How many people we hurt their feelings just to satisfy our desires, right? We get angry, we hurt someone. How many people who deserve or are entitled to something, yet we deprive them of it? Like domestic violence is, it's a global issue, but it's sad to say that it is present in our ummah as well. Why is it there? If all the huquqs were being met, it shouldn't have been there, right? And so not just our amal, not just our actions, even our character is so badly damaged. Like living in a Muslim country, people, I can tell you, people are afraid to do business with someone who looks like they are part of the deen, right? If someone is, a man has a beard, right? He's covering his head. People are actually afraid to do business with such a person. Why? Because our characters are so badly flawed. And that's something that we need to work on, right? And again, you need to apply the same thing as you did with faith. Associate yourself with people who are working on their faith. Associate yourself with people in groups that are working on their a'mal, their character, right? People have good faith and good intentions. That is the way that, and work on it. Think about it. Think about the promises of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Think about the punishments that He has promised, the rewards that He has promised. Those are the things that are going to catapult us forward in this regards as well. Thirdly, we have ignorance, right? And that's another big issue. To say that we're told from the very start that the first verse that was revealed to us was iqra, that to read, to acquire ilm, knowledge. Most of our ummah is very much ignorant. Like we had this talab, we had this desire to know what's happening, to be able to engage to. We came here, we joined together, right? But there's such a big fraction of the ummah that is not engaged in ilm. They're literally unaware of the necessities of Iman or even the basics of Salah or Tahara, right? That's where we are. Like, we don't even know. We say so many things about our religion that might even kick us out of the fold of Islam. We're literally unaware of these things as well. And don't get me started on the halal and haram aspect of our deen. There is so much ignorance, and you and I see that on a daily basis. And sometimes we find that in ourselves as well. The solution is pretty much very easy. Uh, acquire ilm, associate yourself with the people of knowledge. You don't have to go on a full-blown alimiya degree of 8 years or whatnot. You need to know your roles in life. Like, what are your roles? So, I am a husband, I am a son, I am a teacher, right? These are my roles. So, I need to know what are my responsibilities or what are the ahkam associated with my role as a husband, and I need to fulfill them. What are my responsibilities and roles associated with me being a son? Then I have to fulfill them. And what are the responsibilities I have as being a teacher? Then I have to fulfill them. And most importantly, what are my responsibilities as being an abd, a slave of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? And then I have to fulfill that. So each one of us, we have different roles in life. What our responsibility is to know all of those different roles and all of the ahkam related to them, learn about them as much as we can, and then fulfill them. Like, so that's basically all that's required of us. Again, we don't have, and associate yourselves with the ulama, because sometimes you will find yourself in a situation which you're not an expert in, which you don't face day to day. So you might not know the ahkam of that time. So when you're in touch with the ulama, when you're in touch with people of knowledge, you can acquire the knowledge of that possible situation, right? And get yourself the hukum, the order of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the sunnah of the Prophet alayhi salam, right? So we have to fight against that ignorance. And really, this is an effort that all of us should be playing in. بَلِّغُوا عَنِّي وَلَوْ آيَةً. That's what Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam sent us with. Even it's just one single verse that you know, deliver it to the next person. So anything that we learn, we like make it a habit. If you learn something new, share it with someone, right? We post so many things on social media. Why not post something of the knowledge that we're acquiring? Or when you meet your friends or your family, tell them about this, right? Whatever is that new that you learn about your deen. It could be an insight that you get from reading the Quran. Share that, right? It could be something that you learned, a new hadith that you learned. Tell them about that. Maybe there was something that was going on in your household which you realized is not accordance with the laws of Islam, right? Talk to your family about changing that, making your lives better. So again, knowledge is not something you don't need a big degree, you don't need to have some fancy title with you. That's something that all of us are innately built with, the capacity for acquiring knowledge and spreading it, and so we should be using that. And our ignorance, sadly to say, is not just in the religious sphere, it's also in the secular sphere as well. The social sciences or the natural sciences. The social sciences, honestly, I'll just put a small note here, uh, is the result of not having a religious basis. So, us as Muslims, we really don't need the social sciences. It's entirely different discussion. Maybe we'll have that someday. But at that point, I'll just put in that note. But take the natural sciences, for example. We are very weak in that as well. Where are the innovations coming from? They're coming from the West, predominantly uh, non-Muslim people. There are Muslims as well. I'm not denying that. But if you look at the majority who's producing, who's innovating, it's the other communities. As an ummah, we're behind that as well, right? And so what happens is we start imitating them. And so even in our universities, in our colleges, we're not producing thinking minds, we're not producing creative minds, we're producing imitating minds. So they imitate. There's Facebook, imitate. There's this new technology, imitate. Someone's producing a new theory, then you imitate that theory, right? So we need to be the producers. Like we should have our own cars, own vehicles. We should be able to produce that. We should be actually championing this field. We should be competing with Toyota, Honda, or even Tesla, right? These are the big names. Why don't we have that? Because we are not innovators. When the pharmaceuticals, that's run by someone else. Why? Because we don't have the expertise in the research and development part. We don't think like that, and so we just imitate. That's something that we need to come out of. Imitation is, I would say, an other form of ignorance. You might know x plus y is equals to z, but why does x plus y is equal z? That's what we need to focus on. We need to build an ummah, a generation who doesn't know just the facts, it knows the causes behind the facts, it knows the underlying reasons behind that as well. So that's also something that we need to work on. So not everybody's going to end up being a scholar, a religious scholar. We need engineers, we need doctors, we need entrepreneurs, and every other field that you can think of. We need lawyers, politicians, we need all of them. But we need people who aren't just imitating, they're producing, they're innovating, and they're leading. And again, that leads to the next point, blind imitation of the West. We just accept everything. And this, again, comes back to that point I made about social sciences. We just accept all their theories without really analyzing them. Most psychological theories are made in Western universities, which is very out of context for basically the majority of the world. And yet we accept those theories as facts. Take economics, for example. It is literally a social science. It's not based on hard numbers. It's based on human behaviors and philosophies. And yet we're supposed to accept that capitalism or the Western economy or the philosophies behind it are universal. They're not, right? So these are things that we need to understand that what is being produced in West might be true in their culture context, but is literally doesn't have to be true for someone else. What's happening in America does not have to happen for someone living in India or Bangladesh, right? What happens in Europe is of no concern to someone living in the Middle East. So, how their society functions, because their bases are different, will not be the same for us because our base is entirely different. We need to understand that, and we need to people who are able to address this issue as well. Then you have health and wellness issues. Most people, in my experience, associated with Deen really don't take care of their health. We have a general lack of awareness when it comes to health and wellness issues. Like, honestly, ask yourselves how many of you exercise regularly, right? How many of you eat healthy? You don't consume refined sugar, processed foods, right? You're not eating fast food like on a daily basis or even a weekly basis, seriously. We're so unaware of health principles. Uh, Forget about Islamic health principle. That's another story altogether. We're unaware of the basic scientifically proven health principles, right? We don't take care of that. Unless someone becomes sick, we're usually very negligent about all of these things. We're not going to exercise, we're not going to take care of our diet, and sleep is such a problem. Most people aren't sleeping. They're either sleeping way in the night when most of the sleep benefits are being lost on them, or they're sleeping in the day after sunrise, somewhere in the afternoon. And these are so problematic if you study them that this is something that we need to address. And what happens is when you're not well, when you're not healthy, you can't function properly. There's going to be a time when your mind and your body are going to give up. And so you might have a lot of aspirations that you want to do this and you want to do that. But if your body is not going to support you, you can have a million things on your to-do list. You won't be able to check any of them out. And that's something that we also need to focus on is to build not just our personal health, but healthy communities, right? Where it's okay to talk about wanting to live a healthy lifestyle, wanting to not eat sugar, and be safe in that environment, not being judged by you won't be able to do it, or it is impossible to do it, or well, I'm going to eat anyways, and you missing out on the pleasures of life and things like that. Like, as an ummah, we must not be demeaning others if they want to do something positive, right? And we have to work on building this healthy community. Then we have weak economic conditions, right? Because our economies are tied to world trade. You're being told that uh, the more exports that you have, the better your economy is, right? And so, literally, it's being ingrained into our mind that in order to be sustainable, you have to be dependent on others, on other countries, right? The fact is that you don't really need that. Sure, there are things that you're gonna wanna import because they're a necessity of your country and you actually need it. You can't produce it. But most of the things that we have is something that we don't really need. Take, for example, fancy cars or, extremely expensive pet food. Most of the junk that we buy in the name of fashion and apparel. These are things that we don't really need. We can produce them on our own. Each country can do that. I'll give you two examples. Take Germany. After World War II, when they were globally boycotted, like they couldn't get anything in, right? Zero imports because nobody was trading with them. They literally came to the point that they started inventing rubber by themselves, synthetic rubber. They discovered the formula for producing synthetic rubber because people weren't giving it to them. And take Iran as a modern day example, that so many sanctions were placed on it, and everything that you might find in the West, you can almost literally find Iran as well. They've worked so hard in their economy producing locally, right? They're very self-sufficient in that regards. This should be something that every Muslim country and every Muslim community should do. And we have a glimpse of that, right? We've seen that we are able to boycott these multinational companies. We can boycott Starbucks, we can boycott Pepsi, and we have substitutes available. Sure, you might have a valid question. It's not the same quality. Dude, you're not here to live your life in this world as if this were Jannah. You don't always need to have the best quality things. Sometimes minimal quality is a-okay, it's good enough. You'll live, right? But if you are thinking as an ummah, as a community, you need to think larger than yourself. Because if we're thinking only about ourselves or what benefits we can drive right here, right now, we're not going to go very far. Then you have lack of sincere leadership. Take my country, for example, in the last the last five prime ministers, none of them has been able to complete his entire term, right? Because we're not thinking about our communities, our countries, we're thinking about our personal gains. So the leadership that we have is morally corrupt, or for the most part, yes, there are some, obviously, who are good. For most part, they're either morally corrupt, uh, they're so subjugated by the West, so afraid of the West that they're literally paralyzed, unable to do anything. And what we need to do is produce these leaders. And leaders are not made, they're born, which means we have to create an environment in which our future generations can actually be leaders. Our societies, our communities must be emotionally intelligent. They must be resilient. They must have sabr. They must have taqwa. They must have tawakkul. These are the things when ingrained in a society, the children being born in that community, in that society, will automatically be born as leaders. They will be raised as being leaders. And then you have political instability. A lot of reasons, democracy being one of them. It is one of the reasons why we are politically unstable. Then you have those in-group divides, right? Now you have some Sunni states, now some Shia states, and they're at war at each other all the time. Iran and Saudi Arabia, for the longest time, they were at war and they were using like proxy war happening inside of Pakistan, which totally destroyed that uh, political situation in Pakistan as well, right? And the same thing is happening in Syria, in Yemen. And so they were making us fight within ourselves. And we have to realize that, yes, we have differences. Some of them even be life and death differences, but we have a common enemy that we need to work together. That's something that we should think about. And we have ineffective management. We have a lot of resources. We have so much manpower, but we don't know how to effectively manage all of these things. And so a lot of it is being wasted. So, ever heard of brain drain? So, what America does is it takes the best brains out of these countries and brings it to itself. And so, because we can't manage the resources and the people that we have, we lose potential, we lose the power that could have been ours, that we could have harnessed. So these were some of the weaknesses and that we have to work towards, right? Uh, Make sure you can understand how we need to work on. I would like you to think about them, how we can effectively make these weaknesses our strengths. And inshallah, at the end, please place your answer in the comments, right? For everyone to know what your ideas are. The second thing we need to realize our strengths. Our first strength is having the truth with us. Literally, the haqq is with us, right? So we know as Muslims that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala revealed Islam as the final message on the hands of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. That is the truth, and that is our most powerful weapon, right? Because remember, uh, the falsehood, the batil, yes, for a time it may have some um, you may see that it's somewhat reigning in the world. It's growing, but it's very short-lived. If you look at history in the long term, no community built on batil has ever lasted for long. And when you see any community which prospered once and now failed, you'll find that haq was being replaced with the batil. The right, the truth was being steadily replaced with things that were false. And that is what leads to the decline of any nation. So we have our most important power, that is uh, our strength, our being barhaq, right? And so remember, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying, وَقُلْ جَاءَ الْحَقِّ, that the truth has come, وَزَّهَقَ الْبَاطِلِ, and falsehood uh, erased. إِنَّ الْبَاطِلَ كَانَ زَحُوقًا. Falsehood is something that is bound to vanish, that is bound to finish, right? Second thing you have is your faith, right? Your iman with the promises of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, your iman with the prophecies of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and His Messenger, realizing that we need to focus on those things, right? Again, associating ourselves with people who do that. And remember that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is always with us. Wallahu ma'akum. He mentioned in Surah Muhammad, وَكَانَ حَقًّا عَلَيْنَا نَصْرُ الْمُؤْمِنِينَ. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has Himself taken the responsibility that it is my responsibility to help the believers. And we need to believe that in order to gain the assistance from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Then we have all those prophecies, right? وَإِنَّ جُنْدَنَا لَهُمُ الْغَالِبُونَ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions that our armies will eventually be the ones who will be victorious, right? وَلَا تَهِنُوا وَلَا تَحْزَنُوا وَأَنْتُمُ الْأَعْلَوْنَ إِن كُنْتُم مُؤْمِنِينَ. If you truly are believers, right? Then there's nothing to fear and there's nothing to be worried about. وَأَنْتُمُ الْأَعْلَوْنَ, and you will eventually be the ones who will succeed, who will be on top. لِيُظْهِرَهُ عَلَى الدِّينِ كُلِّهِ وَلَوْ كَرِهَ الْمُشْرِكُونَ. And that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has done this and He will make Islam prominent, even if people don't like it, even if the mushrikeen, the non-believers don't like it, Islam will become dominant. And we're seeing that with our very eyes today, right? They tried so hard for so long, but this just one single event that's happening in Gaza, so many people are turning towards the Quran. In fact, this is the best moment to give da'wah to the non-Muslimin towards Islam, right? The problem is we are so focused with the Western propaganda that we literally haven't taken out the time to read our own book. We haven't taken out the time to read the Quran and understand the message within it. If we knew the truth, if we knew what the Quran said, the Western propaganda would never have made us fearful. And we're seeing that now because everything's exposed. So many people are turning towards the Quran. Now, as Muslims, as people of knowledge, it's our time to guide them, right? They're searching. We can be the beacons of hope for them. We can be the beacons of light that shows them towards Sirat al-Mustaqim. Then you have the divine message. What do I mean by the divine message? Literally, what you're presenting to the world is not man-made. It's not coming out of someone's. It's not someone's brainchild. It is literally from the God of heaven and earth and everything in between, right? And not only that, the divine message that we have is protected. Like Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has been sending divine messages since the dawn of mankind, but eventually all of them were got corrupted. But Islam is something that not only is it a divine message, it is also a protected message, right? Every single word is protected. Every single action of Prophet alayhi salam has also been protected, right? The biographies of every single person who associated themselves with transmitting the hadith of Prophet alayhi salam and Islam have also been protected, right? So it's not just one book that's been protected, not the life of just one person, but the life of everybody associated with that being has also been protected. And that also gives us another strength that the divine message that we have is actually divine. And one of the other strengths that we have is our numbers, right? Alhamdulillah, Alhamdulillah, our numbers are increasing, right? And the birth rate in Muslim societies is always much more in non-Muslim societies, other than the fact that there's so many non-Muslims who are also accepting Islam, right? And you see ads. If you're living in the West, you might not be aware, but if you're living uh, in South Asia, for example, you'll see like ads about Ireland inviting people to come live in their village and even willing to pay people, right? Germany, England, Canada, they're all inviting people to come to them because there's a shortage of workers, there's a shortage of people who could do farming activities. So they're literally losing people who could do work. And we have so many people, right? Uh, People themselves can be we can have a monopoly of people, the Muslim Ummah. And that's something we need to realize that these numbers are a strength. We can literally use these people, get them to positions of high power in these different countries, or make them the majority workforce there, and then use them for the benefit of Islam. And not just Islam itself, benefit for the mankind. And then you have the geostrategic position in which most of our countries are. Take the Middle East, for example. Take Turkey, for example. It has the best sea route and the best land route for trade. And global trade cannot happen without these two things. Air routes are very expensive. You can't do global trade on air. You need the sea to do that. You need the land to do that. And we have the best geostrategic positions in the world, both by land and by sea. And that's something that we could use. Natural resources, all of our countries, uh, so many natural resources. Take the Middle East, take South Asia, take Africa. Uh, Instead of giving it to Western companies who come, extravagate, exploit, and leave, we should be the ones doing it this ourselves, so that we don't have to share these resources with them. These are some of our strengths that we should focus on and use that, right? Literally think about it how we can use our strengths in order to overpower the enemy. Third thing that you need to do is look at the weakness of the enemy. They also have a weakness of decadence. They're morally corrupt, right? Ethically and morally, they don't really have a basis in which they're functioning on, because where they derive their morals are from philosophies created by the human mind. So literally, they're flawed, and they're not agreed upon even basic tenets. Everybody's going to have a different approach to life, right? They have a structured family system. Their economy is failing. We might be on an onset of another global depression, right? Uh, their human resources, because they treat human beings as, again, other resources, right? And that's dwindling very fast, because now in this very open and free society, women aren't willing to get married, settle down, and have children. And why would they have children? Uh, Children mean responsibility, and what the West is teaching us so far is that you live for yourself only, and so they don't have children. I think it was in Japan or maybe China that they're now trying to create artificial wombs because the women there aren't willing to have children, so they're trying to create artificial wombs so they can actually make sure that their communities live on. They have a faulty belief system. We know that. Uh, their belief system is basically so defected that in itself, it's not really supporting them, right? They're mentally and psychologically torn. They're confused. They're lost. They're always finding something, right? You have all of these new things coming into the market. Uh, you have sound therapy, vibration therapy, you have hypnosis, hypnotherapy, you have all of these different practices that are going on. People going towards Buddhism to find spirituality that's missing in their system. And so, whatever beliefs that they have is not really supporting uh, the human nature that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has built it on. And then we know about the broken family and social systems, right? So, foster children, foster care, and orphanages are so prevalent there. Not because there were children who lost their parents in war. Most of them are because, well, they're born out of wedlock and their mothers never wanted them. And so now they're in the system. And in the system, they're not fully supported. So they don't turn out to be good members of society, and which creates another problem for the society as well. The social systems are broken. Domestic violence, for example, is a systemic problem in America. Literally, the law and the police systems there actually support domestic violence, strangely enough. So, again, whether it be a single basic family unit or a social structure, um, everything there is literally something that can be replaced and is being willing to replace. But the problem is we haven't done our homework, and most of us are unable to present a viable solution to them. Like a lot of us can make this claim that we have the solution, but if asked to present that solution, we're not really prepared to do that. So that's something that we need to work on. Instead of just making claims, and I'm not saying that they're false, they're actually very true. We need to do the work. We need to get that research done. We need to get those proposals ready. So whenever any of us has a chance, we can present it. Worldly attachment, because we believe that there is a life after this one. But if you actually believe in the Western philosophy of life, you only believe that this is the world. There's nothing after it, which means everything that you do is for here. And again, this promotes everything that's happening. Then you will be an individualist. You will only think about yourself. You won't care for having children. You will care for having a functional society. You just want to live your life, be able to get back home from a job that you might not normally have done, but you're forced in order to pay your rent, in order to pay for food, and then you just want to go back home to Netflix with a can of Coke in your hand. Like that's what worldly attachment is gonna get you. Maybe you aim for the latest iPhone, or maybe changing your car model every year, and maybe by the time you retire, you might be able to own a house, right? And so that's like the West, whether it be America or be Europe. But that's not sustainable. That's not long term. Global crisis, the climate crisis, is there because whatever decisions were made solely for people of that time. No one thought about what the future is going to be. And all of this, when you don't have a moral basis, when your economy is failing right in front of you, when your numbers are decreasing, you don't have a belief system to support you, and all of your social systems are broken, you will become psychologically ill. You will become depressed. You will become anxious for everything that's going to happen in your life. So these are the weaknesses that we need to exploit on. Provide these people with psychological assistance, provide them a way out, provide them a substitute for this worldly attachment, make them able to detach themselves from the world and concentrate on the spiritual, right? Fix that broken family system and fix those social systems, right? Introduce the concept of marriage once again, the concept of family, the concept of brotherhood, right? Get them out of that individualistic mindset or the hedonistic mindset that they have and work on their faiths. And now's the best time, right? The hearts are turning, the hearts are yearning for something, they're yearning for the truth, and we have it, so we need to provide it. Last thing that we need to know is the enemy's strength. And honestly, this is out of the four things, this is the least important thing to focus on. So we know at the moment they're politically dominant, but again, things are changing very fast in that sphere as well. They're economically dominant, and that too is changing very fast. And we, with the numbers we have, actually have the power to push them off the edge. Military wise, you would say that they're dominant. They have so many artillery and obviously such a big weaponry business that's happening in the US mainly and other countries as well. And so you might say that they have the latest technology, the latest weapon. But the truth is, Israel has the latest weapon. But a handful of Hamas members are making them so worried and are creating such problems for them. So you might have all the technology, but that's just one part of the equation, right? And you might say that they have intellectual dominance. True, they do, but remember, that is fictional dominance that they have. Intellectually, they might not be as uh, good as they seem, especially again in terms of the social sciences. Whatever they're producing uh, is not going to be very long term or going to be viable for most of us. So instead of being impressed by what they produce, by the literature that they print, we need to critically engage in their literature secondary, firstly with our own literature, our own heritage, and provide the solutions for today's problems that we need from that. Like, I'm in no position to say this, but trust me, if you go back to the literature that we have, even the really old one, you will find so many solutions to the modern problems that we have. It's just that most of us don't find the time or don't actually know where to search. So, again, associate yourself with the people of knowledge, and they'll help you find the right things or they'll guide you to the right resources that you would need to actually present solutions to the society. The most important thing in all four of these is to focus on our strengths. Our strengths are the things that are going to get us somewhere because you might make a misjudgment in the weakness of the enemy and trying to attack that. You might not always succeed, but if you play on your strengths, you will always, or most of the time, get the positive results that you're aiming for. Now, this was the first part of today's class, the field analysis. Now, let's talk about preliminary work. What we need to do in here is, first of all, after we've done the analysis, after we know our strengths, our weaknesses, and the enemy's strengths and weaknesses, we need to know our objectives, a why are we going to do what we're going to do. So in our case, we're waging an ideological war. What are our objectives behind this? We need to know that. Number two, we need to know the targets. Who are we going to wage this war on? And number three, there are some prerequisites that anyone wanting to engage in this war should be equipped with. So our objectives, first of all, includes the pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We're not doing it to gain political dominance. We're not doing this to gain economical dominance, material dominance. We're not the villain of the movie who wants world domination. We do what we do because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has ordered us to do it. We do what we do because we know what we have, the truth that we have is the solution to all of society's problem, right? And so we're doing it for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that's actually the strength in itself. That gives us power. Because even if we're not seeing results for our efforts, we know we did it for Allah and our reward is with Him. So you might not get anything in this world, but you can rest assured with the promises that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has made that there is a big reward in the hereafter. And so we can capitalize on this very fact that we don't need to see results in order to put in efforts. Just keep putting them in. Second of all, we're connecting people with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And as Dawood alayhi salam said, that what could be better to connect someone with Allah who's been disconnected with Him, right? And so connecting people with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is one of the missions why we're waging this war. Those people whose hearts are ready to accept Islam, accept the truth, to connect them with Allah, to connect them with the Quran, with Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. That's why we're waging this war. Number three, we want to combat all anti-Islamic conspiracies about us being terrorists, about us being morally corrupt, or our societies being in the worst condition the world could ever see, and about that we want to dominate the world and kill all Jews, right, and kick the Christians out of their countries. All of these conspiracies that people have about us, we need to combat all of them, and we need to show them the face of Islam as it is, right? Then we have dawah to Islam to non-Muslim people, dawah to Islam for Muslim people in the sense that you bring Muslims lost towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to connect them with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in terms of their a'mal, in terms of their iman, in terms of their akhlaq. Another objective of waging this war is to implement the Sharia because the Sharia is the best law that any of us could ever have for our societies, our countries. Then we're waging this war for the dominance of Islamic thought and ideology. And remember, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala already mentioned, لِيُظْهِرَهُ عَلَى الدِّينِ كُلِّهِ, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will eventually establish and make this ideology and thought dominant. We want to play the part of it. And lastly, it's to unify the ummah. Some people might think of it as through establishing the khilafah. Okay, that's a thought. That's something that people should work towards, right? But in any form or way, if we unify the ummah, like if we don't have these racial and national boundaries of being Saudi, Qatari, Pakistani, Turkish, Bangladeshi, right? Forget all this. Just as a single Muslim ummah, that's what we want to create, and that's why we're waging the ideological warfare. Well, who are the targets? First of all, ourselves. We need to work on ourselves. We talked about our weaknesses, so it's not like any of us are perfect. So we need to work on ourselves, on our faith, so they don't corrupt us. We need to work on ourselves so we are able to fulfill our responsibilities towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and towards the people. Second, we need to work on our families, right? Uh, who would want to be successful and want their whole family to not succeed? Nobody would want that, right? Why would anyone want to go to Jannah and not care about their family not going to Jannah? Obviously, if you hate them, that's another story. But if you are living by Islamic principles, if you and your family are living by uh, Islamic character, then you won't be hating each other. You'll be loving each other, and you each would want the other to succeed. And so we have to work on our families. Uh, our family members who maybe have been influenced by the West, we need to work on them to get them to see the beauty of Islam. Our family members who might not be practicing, so we need to get them to be practicing Muslims, right? And there's so many things that we could work on, all the things that we just talked about. After the family comes the community that you live in, right? Look at the people around you, your neighbors, right? Are they economically well off? Are they in a situation with which they could use help? Then go out and help them, right? Uh, is your neighbor going to Salah when it's time or not? Uh, are they practicing Ramadan, right? That's something that you can work on. Or if your neighbor is actually very mean, that's something that you could try and work on, right? So we need to work on our communities as well in all of those areas that we've been discussing. We need to target the less privileged fraction of the society. Interestingly enough, if you see most of the people who followed any prophet of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you'd see it was usually the less privileged of the society, the poor people, as we say, that they were the one who mostly followed the prophets, and they were the primary target of the prophets themselves because they are most in number and most willing to accept the truth. Because the elite will also try to target them as well. And the elite, usually with all of the material that they have in this world, they're aloof, disconnected, and they don't really care about these things. So it's difficult to get them to believe. It's difficult to get them to connect with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so that's why our first focus should be the less privileged of the society. And at the same time, we should be focusing on the elite as well, because it's these elite uh, that usually run the society. If you get them to accept Islam, if you get them to look at Islam in a positive manner and to implement Islam, a lot of things that we're trying to do will we can achieve those targets much quicker. Students and teachers in our institutions, academic institutions, in universities, colleges, because they're being exposed to those Western ideas and philosophies, and we need to protect them. So we need to work on them as well. And our leaders, right? Those who have the administrative authority in our countries, in our communities, because if they're upright, if they're supporting Islam, they're working and they're establishing Islamic law and principles, then again, the same as the elite, all of our targets are much more likely to be achieved and at a much faster rate. And lastly, you have the prerequisites. Now, the reason why all of us are here is that we want to engage more effectively in this ideological warfare, right? What are the things that we need to be equipped with in order to do this the most effective way possible? First of all, you need to have unshakable faith, right? Even when seeing death with your own eyes, you should have the utmost tawakkul on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the utmost belief that even if 100 tanks are pointed towards you and there is a plane ready to bomb you above your head, one must have the belief that if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wills, it is only then that I will die and that these things will harm and damage me. But if it's Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala who's not willing anything to happen to me, Even if they were to drop an atom bomb on you, nothing would happen. That is the kind of faith that we need and we need to work on. Second, we need to have sincerity. We're not going to be waging this war to become famous on social media or in the world, be known as the savior of the Muslimin, right? We're not doing this so we can get money out of it. We're doing it sincerely for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, sincerely for the ummah. We don't need nothing from anyone. And that was basically the message of all of the prophets. In ajriya illa ala Allah. I ask of you nothing, O my people. My reward is with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that is the kind of sincerity that we need. We're not going to be expecting anything from anyone when we're going to be engaging in this war, and we're going to be inviting people towards Islam and towards its qualities. Remembrance of Allah. Always remember Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That connection must always be there. Uh, your recitation of the Quran, tilawat of the Quran, that should be on a daily basis. Your pondering over the verses of the Quran daily basis. Your salawat, your zakat, your sadaqat, all these things, and your like du'as all the time. Like the Prophet ﷺ, he gave us du'as for every single situation that we see. When you wake up, when you go to sleep, when you go to the bathroom, when you come out, when you eat, when you finish eating, like when you get out of the house, when you come back to the house, when you start work, when you end work. For everything, there is a dua. And when you are making the dua for everything that you do, you are always remembering Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So the best way is to incorporate all of those du'as in your life. Take the book Hisnul Hasin. That's just one example of so many books. Collection of du'as for every event that happens daily in your life. Remember those du'as, and make them whenever the time comes. Earning halal, very important. The hadith mentions that you'll see a person, a traveler, right? His clothes are foiled, his hair all unraveled and everything, but he raises his hand and his dua is unaccepted. Why? Because what he wears is haram, what he eats is haram. And so earning halal is very important because if we're not earning halal, we're not eating halal, then all the du'as that we're making are going to be ineffective because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not going to entertain any du'a which is coming from a body that has been raised on haram, right? And earning halal is also important because halal has barakah in it. We have so many problems in our daily lives, financially speaking. The reason why is because we're engaged in some sort of haram. Maybe our earnings are haram, that's the worst way, or maybe we're engaged in other haram activities, sins, which removes the barakah. So earning halal in its fullest manner is going to relieve so much of the financial problems that we have individually, as a community, and as a country. Then you need simplicity. Honestly, everything is important, but this one principle of simplicity, I would say for the du'at, for those doing dawah work, is the best. Because if your life is very simple, right, and you don't have all of those needs, all of those wants that I want this and I want that, I want to live in a fancy house, I want to wear branded clothes, right, and I want my own transport, the best sports car there is, you're okay with what you get, even if it's just plain bread with nothing else. You're okay with the small two-bedroom apartment, maybe in the suburbs of your city. You're happy with that. You have a very simple lifestyle. You can do dawah work much more effectively. Because when you're tied materialistically, it becomes so much more difficult to say the truth. Then you're going to always be walking on eggshells, not to offend someone, not to offend a fan or a follower who might be subscribing to my channel or purchasing the endorsed goods through my link and stuff like that, right? You'll always be able to speak the truth, no matter what the case. So to live simply is to protect yourself from so many of the materialistic fitna out there. Delivery of human rights. Because if people are angry with you, they're not happy with you, they're not going to support you, they're not going to listen to you. You can't expect to take money from someone, not return it, and then expect them to behave nicely with you, or expect them to listen to what dawah that you're giving them, right? Or if a husband's not delivering his wife his rights, right? He's not giving her the nafaqah, he's not taking care of her emotional needs, right? Not talking to her, not complimenting her, and then he expects her to behave and listen to him. That's not gonna happen. So we need to realize that, and we need to give each person the rights that they have. The Islamic concept over here is that Islam doesn't talk about rights, it talks about responsibilities. So it literally engages the person responsible because every responsibility is tied to another person's right. So when I'm fulfilling my responsibilities, that means my parents, my siblings, my relatives, my wife's rights are being met. So that's Islam's way of looking at it. It always talks about responsibilities, right? So we need to be responsible and deliver the rights that other people have over us. And when everybody is with this mindset trying to fulfill their responsibilities, everybody is going to receive their rights. What we see today is everybody's asking for their rights, but there's no accountability. There's no pressure on the delivery of the rights, of responsibility. They don't talk about that. And so now everybody's just asking for their own rights, but not willing to fulfill their responsibilities, give others their rights. And so nobody's happy. But if everybody's going to be focused on responsibility, fulfilling rights, then obviously your rights themselves but also be fulfilled. You need to know the necessary knowledge of Islam. In whatever field you are engaged in, you at least need to know the minimum of that field. What's halal, what's haram, and how do I navigate, and how do I give dawah in that field. You need istiqamah, steadfastness. There will be days that you don't want to do what you're doing. You don't want to do that work. There will be days when you're tired, you're unhappy, you're depressed, you're sad. There's so much going on in your life that you can't find the strength. Or there may be days you just don't want to do it. You don't feel like it. You have to persevere in all of this. That is the only way that it's going to work, right? And we may fall down. That's okay. Just get back up and brush yourself off. Uh, like Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, when Surah Al-Hud was revealed, right? There's an ayah in Surah Al-Hud, and because of that ayah, the Prophet Islam used to say, "Shayyabatni Hud wa akhawatuha," that Surah Al-Hud and other surahs like it have actually made me old. And what was that verse? Fastaqim kama umirt. That be steadfast, have istiqamah as you have been commanded. And so it was such a difficult task that even the Prophet says that I became old because of this, the pressure of it. And so you will find it's very difficult to be steadfast. Very, very difficult. To be honest, only a few people can ever actually do it completely. But that's okay. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The important thing is that whenever you fall down, you get back up. Concern for the ummah. So one should be self-sacrificing. Self-sacrificing does not mean that you deny your body the right to eat, to sleep, right? Or put yourself in situations which jeopardize your authority or even your deen. That kind of concern we're not talking about. But you should have a general concern for the ummah, which means that if I have to forego changing my phone in order to provide for a family, we should be the people who would want to do that, right? So the concern for the ummah at large should be much more than the concern that you have for yourself. Uh, we need to have geopolitical awareness. That's very important. We need to know what's going on around us, what's happening in the world, how things are shifting, how the power dynamics is changing. You don't have to be very political for that, right? And maybe not everybody's going to be interested in geopolitics, right? But if you want to do it on a policy level, on a larger level, having geopolitical awareness is very beneficial. you'll know actually where you can actually do more better dawah work, where you can find more supporters, where you can get the maybe economical support that you want, right? So having this geopolitical awareness, it's like having a map in front of you, which tells you everything, which tells you uh, where to attack next, where to put up defenses on, where to seek help, and everything, right? So that's also an important thing that we should know. Awareness of history. Again, a lot of us are not interested in history, but knowing history, uh, like it's famous, right? A famous saying that those who don't know history tend to repeat it. So knowing history helps you know exactly when you are going towards a downfall. So Ibn Khaldun, rahimahullah ta'ala, the founder of modern sociology, was a historian, and his philosophy on history is basically he created a cycle in which he says that there's a cycle which all nations go through. And if you look at those cycles, all of them have certain characteristics. When you know those characteristics, you can tell when a nation is about to die or when it's about to fall, right? So knowing history helps you with that. So, for example, you're seeing a problem in your society and you know that this is going to lead to a downfall. Now you know that this is something that you need to address, so your attention will be focused on that, right? So this is one of the benefits of knowing history. So being aware of history is also very important. Contentment. Just as simplicity, you need to be content with what you have. Sometimes you want to do something so big, we put ourselves in situations that we regret later. So being content with everything, with what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given you in terms of material strength or in terms of material objects that you have been given, be content with that. Also be content with the work that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is taking from you. So if you're engaged in da'wah work, if you're engaged in work of ilm, right? Not everybody's going to be on the same level. Someone's going to be like publishing book after book, right? And they'll be going to international conferences and meetings and stuff like that. You might be just focused on your own single community. Don't compare. Be content with what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is giving you the opportunity to do, right? Because you don't know the kind of ikhlas that you're putting in or the kind of effort that you're putting in. It may have much more widespread results. It may have much more deeper results than someone that's going all around the globe, right? So be content with what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is giving you in all aspects, in spiritual aspects, in material aspects, whatever it may be. And then you have charity. Wallahi, most of us see as when you give charity, you are losing capital, you're losing income. Most of it will see that if I give $20 out of 100 that I have, I'm left with 80. And yet Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَيُرْبِ الصَّدَقَةِ that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala increases the sadaqah. And the Prophet Islam tells us, مَا نَقَصَ مَالٌ مِّن صَدَقَةٍ that never has it been the case that if you give charity, your wealth is reduced. It doesn't reduce like that. We need to have faith in that, that the more we give in the way of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the more Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will return it to us. And literally, this is the most easiest way to get rich, is to give more charity, right? Even if someone's not going very high with what we're trying to go here, and it's just that we're focusing on, give charity. That's the best way that you can go forward. And then you have your duty towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, all your farais, all your ibadat, you should be focused on fulfilling them. And lastly, abstinence from all sorts of evil, all sorts of sin, everything that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has told us not to do, we are supposed to abstain from it. Because that will produce the nur, the light that we need to make an effective da'wah. Now we come to the final session of waging of war. There are three phases in which we can do that. First phase is focusing on the Muslim community itself, right? And so now you'll be giving Muslims themselves a dawah of faith and good actions, right? Reminding them of the promises of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, reminding them of faith, reminding them everything that happens, or can happen happens only with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's permission, right? Giving them dawah of good actions, giving them dawah to make more sadaqah, to pray, to join, to engage in dawah activities themselves, right? Then you have dawah towards Islam. If you're living in a Western country or you know non-Muslims, bring them towards Islam. Show them the good side of Islam, right? Don't engage them in philosophical debates or don't engage them in particulars. Right now, you're just inviting towards the faith. And so if they're asking you about what about slavery and what about abuse of women and women's rights, these are things that for most us, the normal Dawa people, that's irrelevant. Don't engage in those particulars. Invite them to the source. Because once you accept Islam, once someone accepts Islam, you accept everything that comes with it. And right? And the power of Islam is that once you enter the folds, everything else becomes more clear and you're more willing to accept everything else. So your dawah should be focused on the principles. Populating the masajid, right? So that's something that we need to do. Our masjids should not be empty. They should always be populated. There should always be someone there engaged in an act of ibadah, in ilm, in giving dawah or something like that. Like our masajid used to be, right? The concept of closing a masjid and locking it, that should not exist. That's how we have to populate our masajid. And then have to work on extracurriculars, sports, literature, entertainment, things like that, right? Because these can be actual sources of dawah themselves. You want to target people in sports, like if you play football, go out, play football, and then after you're done, when it's time for Maghrib Salah, invite people to come with you. Right? Just one sentence, one word, it's very much sufficient. Phase two is working on a more higher level. That is, first you have to reconcile the Western educated masses with the deen. Show them that Islam is not a hindrance for your material progress, for the progress in this world, right? And deen is not something that accepting it and following it means that you have to leave the entire dunya behind. Rather, reconcile those Western educated Muslims, masses with the deen, the fact that if you really want to succeed in this life and in the hereafter, Islam is the only way. Practicing it is the only way. Then you want to establish global welfare services. We don't want to be dependent on the United Nations. We don't want to be dependent on the international community of Red Cross. We want to have our own institutions which work on our faith and our principles. And then you have to establish deen-based contemporary educational institutes. So we're not going to be studying Darwin there. We're not going to be studying Max Weber, right? We'll be studying contemporary education. We'll be studying science, not through these people, but through people like Ibn Rushd or Ibn Nafis, right? Imam Razi, for example. So we're learning the same things. We're going to be learning economics. We're going to be learning uh, physics, chemistry, bio, whatever subject there is, but it's going to be stemming from our belief system. And lastly, you have media. That's something we really need to work on because, most of the narrative is built by media. Social media has been a very good tool that we have. Keep using that. Islamic economics and economic independence. That's something we need to work on because capitalism is failing and it has failed, just like communism once failed. The only way you can have a sustainable economy and an independent economy, independent of the West, independent of the World Bank, the IMF, independent of riba, is if you adopt in Islam. I'm not just talking about Islamic finance. There's work being done there, but the field of Islamic economics is something much larger and needs much more work. And then you have politics. And though democracy is not aligned with Islamic principles, that has a lot of problems. At the moment, we can't completely reject democracy. So we need representation over there. But instead of just being either Democrat or Republic or Labor or Liberal. We need to create a party that represents us completely, right? Because any politician that we have is making some sort of compromise on their principles. We need political representation without any compromise on principles. And so that's something we need to work towards. And yes, we don't believe in democracy as the solution. There are other ways. So you're not just going to force it on people. It'll take time, but we have to work towards that. The Khilafah, inshallah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And with that, Alhamdulillah, we come to the end of the important discussions that we needed to make. So if you guys have any questions, insights, I would be happy to take them.